The illustrious Jabba bids you welcome. I'm going to regret this.
I'm Pete Mitchell. He's Peyton Jones. And this is the Church Planter Podcast, brought to you by Church Planter Magazine.
Okay, I just gotta finish swallowing this. I'm Pete Mitchell. Hey, Church Planter. This is Pete Mitchell.
And this is Peyton Jones.
And you're listening to the ever-professional Church Planter Podcast.
Indeed. And the reason we're laughing is Pete, right before we start recording, he puts his chocolate chip muffin up to it. And I'm like, dude, is that a chocolate chip muffin? That's like dessert for breakfast. Remember Cookie Crisp when you're a kid? My mom never let me buy Cookie Crisp.
What do you mean when I was a kid?
That's seriously the best line so far of 2018. What do you mean when I was a kid? I can buy Cookie Crisp now every time I want.
Oh, my gosh, dude.
Have you ever had that kind of conversation with your wife, by the way, where she's like, you can't do that? And you're like, I'm a grown man. I can do whatever I want.
She hates birthdays and Christmas with me because she knows my line to her is, I'm an adult. If I want something, I go buy it.
And you know, every time you have to tell somebody you're an adult, you're just showing that you're still 5. Like, there's never been a time where
I thought you were going to say every time
man has come out of my mouth and I have not sounded like a child. Never.
I thought you were going to say
rule.
I thought you were going to say something like, you know, every time you got to say that, an angel gets its wings.
Every time you say that, somewhere in the world, a man is changing his own flat tire. None of this AAA.
Church Planter Magazine.
That has become my new favorite soundbite.
Yes.
And just so you know, never mind. I'm not even going to tell you. I'm going to save it for later. I'm saving it. I'm saving it.
All right. Well, we're in Smack Talk, so it's not like we're standing on ceremony. By the way, today's topic is how John Wesley. Oh, do we have a Yoda? Do I have an intro into that? Any kind of?
I don't think we had an intro for what today's topic is. Well, who was it?
Yeah, we used to have Yoda.
No, Yoda was who it's sponsored by.
Yeah, and then we had well, I know we have Doc Brown. We used to have one. We used to actually.
No, that's when we actually. That's when we.
Well, I'm going to make it right now. Today's topic is. Oh, I can say the whole thing. I don't even have
Let's get down to the nitty-gritty.
How John Wesley planted churches. He did. And local networks. He built.
It's all right. I give that a 7 or an 8.
I wouldn't even go that high, to be frank with you. I'd give
that bad.
I would rate that as
here. I got new headphones.
I would rate that as The Last Jedi. That's really how bad that was.
Okay. So you've segged into it. Barry Waters has told me that if I do not confess soon on the podcast, particularly this episode, he texted me this morning. I get this thing because they're 8 hours ahead of us in Europe. He goes, if you don't he goes, first off, I'm very disappointed. I listened to the podcast and I did not hear you confess yet what you've said to me. And if you do not share your secret, I will tell the world your dark secret. So I have to confess, Pete, I went back and saw the movie again, and it was better the second time, and it pains me to say that because I still don't like it. That was quick.
I have been given a sound effect to cut off Peyton Jones.
And it's kind of like a government, cover up. It's kind of relevant. A government cover up that basically you would know. You would just think my train came by. Like, that's the genius of Pete's soundbite. So Travis provided that. He should get a raise.
I needed to cut you off because you were speaking blasphemy, heresy.
Thank you for talking me off the ledge. So I confessed to him. I said, I saw it again, and you're right. Stuff made more sense to me this time. It was a little bit easier of a pill to swallow. I'm not quite as angry, but it's kind of like the dark side, Pete. Like, it was like I was seduced when I saw it the second time. And you start, because I remember even you said, I saw it the second time. It was a little bit better, but
I also said I fell asleep for 2 hours of the 2.5 hour movie.
Oh, you woke up at the end.
I woke up at the end.
Minutes. Oh,
yes.
No wonder. But the reality is, I kind of got more what the guy was trying to pull, and I actually feel that he's tricking us. But I think there's a little bit of trickery. I think all's not as it seems, and everything that we've taken at face value is not what it is. But what I will say is I still think his directorial choices were absolutely wrong for the Star Wars franchise. That I will not repent of. I see more what he was trying to do, but he was still wrong. So, Barry,
on my commute to work, I am listening to Church Planner Podcast. I am.
Those were Pete's birthday presents. Travis is a guy who works for us, and he basically he contacted me one morning. He goes, "Hey, Peyton, I only need 3 sound bites, maybe 4 if you're feeling inspired. Yoda saying a couple things like this." I sent him like 23 sound bites because once I got going, I was literally in the car. I was doing it on Voxer for him, and which is what we use for Bible Inner Circle. And I'm laughing my butt off in between takes. And then I go back and listen to them, and they sound good on 1 speed, 2 speed, 3 speed, because Yoda's a little squirrely monkey. I mean, he sounds good fast and slow.
Well, before we get into more smack talk, we didn't do our lead-off sponsor.
Welcome, you are. This week's episode of the Church Planter Podcast is brought to you by...
Hi, I'm Scott Blair, church planter. If you are anything like I used to be, you probably woke up feeling alone and somewhat isolated today, wondering to yourself, why isn't there just one place that I can go to discuss the things I really care about, like bear attacks, Sir Mix-a-Lot, Game of Thrones, and even Christology? Well, I'm here to tell you such a place now exists. This is not make-believe. I would not joke about a thing like this. Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones have created such a place. No. It's not heaven. They didn't create that, but it's the next best thing. The Bivo Ministry Inner Circle.
What? I love that. It's not heaven. No. They didn't create that.
I would not joke about a thing like that.
Which, by the way, you can find all about Bivo Inner Circle by going to BivoInnerCircle.com.
Indeed. And if you guys don't listen to our other podcast, Hardcore Church Planting, that is our interview podcast, where this week in particular, we had a part 2 of a church planter up in Portland, Oregon, who's using business as mission, which is kind of like a little, trendy little thing to talk about. It was trendy in the first century, which is why I care about it. But, I know that most of you ministers and leaders and pastors out there are trendy little critters. So you like trendy things. So there's a little trendy treat for you, since that's what you're into. Because next year you'll be into the next trend. But I'm going to throw the first century ones at you as much as I can.
So my life was made complete this week when I got a Facebook message from... I love how you start laughing because you know where I'm going.
Yeah.
So I get a Facebook message from one of our church planners who I've actually never met face to face. And he's in Stanton. And those of you in Southern California know about Stanton, right? It's a place that's it's inner city Long Beach, just Stanton. But it's the same thing.
It was the only place I told God I would go in Orange County.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
Stanton needed a church plant bad.
Yeah, really, really bad. So, and we've mentioned this particular church plant on the on the podcast before, because I remember reading on Facebook that they had people who were armed at their church, like intentionally armed because of where they're at. So anyway, this pastor reaches out and says, "Hey, you know, I kind of got a stalker who's got some mental issues, and I don't think anything's going to happen, but I just can't be stupid about it. And you know, I need to pick up a gun." And I know you're into them, so can you please give me some advice? In that moment, I was like, "Whoa!"
Oh, Little Mermaid. Pete's feet actually left the ground, and the necklace he was wearing started to pull him upwards into the sky. It was very ephemeral.
Dude, all I can say is, like, he must have regretted messaging me, because he messages like this one little paragraph. "Hey, you know, used to have a 357. That's a little bit too much gun for what I need. You know, what would you recommend?" And it was like,
It was like you unloaded at the gun range.
It kind of was.
And by the way, guys, just so you know, this is not a redneck podcast. It's not like, you know, we're over here going America, and, you know, I'm not a gun owner at all. So please do not think this is
I've got yours.
Right-wing, gun-toting, Bible-thumping.
I've got your guns for you.
Well, one of us on here is sane. That's all I'm saying. One of us on here, I don't want to mention any names, might have a little problem right now.
Boy, do I. Boy, do I.
Church Planner Podcast audience, I think it's time to do an intervention. Only because the sickness is spreading. What's so funny is I'm like, "Pete, you have a new ministry." It was so funny. And then I get this email. Did you get the email I sent you?
Yeah, I saw it.
There's a guy, I'm not going to say that.
There's actually a lot of, so for those of you who've been following the podcast, you've heard me talk about this. I've applied for what's called your CCW, Concealed Carry Weapons Permit. I don't know that I'm going to carry. I'm just kind of just having fun with the whole thing, right? So I applied for it, you know, just for fun of it. And I'm in the facility that, like, teaches you got to go through a class here in California and all this other jazz. And this guy is like, "Yeah, we actually got called in to do this one church. We had to train every pastor on staff." And he goes, "They have a lot of staff." And he goes, "And they're all carrying now." And I'm like, "Oh, so anyway, this is what I was going to share with you about our friend in Stanton. I think what it is, I don't think he really has a stalker. I think he's trying to recruit me to his church plant. It's working."
That is rad.
I'm just kidding.
You know what? I gotta say though, Beep. Church plant is rad.
I didn't necessarily want to say his name, man. I didn't want to, because I might have to cut that out or beep it or something.
Hey, like, can you tell me next time?
I was because that's his private issue, man. I don't want to, like, throw it out there. You know?
All right, so there's no way to redeem that. Do we have to scrub that out? We have to scrub that out.
I'll beep out his name.
Okay. All right.
Because I don't want to throw his stuff out there, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
You know.
No, hey, I got you. We only air our own dirty laundry.
That's pretty much it. Yeah. But you know, the coolest thing was he moves at the speed of instruction. I told him where to go get it. He literally down there that day picked it up. He sends me a picture, because in California you got to have something called a firearm safety certificate, which is ridiculous. It's another way the state gets $25. And he's like, "Hey, I got it. 10 days and I'll have it."
You may have just coined for me a phrase that is going to become one of my favorites.
Oh, no.
He moves at the speed of instruction.
Oh,
that is awesome.
That
is a cool term, dude.
It is. And that's what you want to do.
That's like, you should suck that boy into Bivo. He would be your poster child. That's what it takes, man.
I know, right?
That's why I'm not in it.
Some of these guys, it's taken like a year to get them to do it.
Hey, why do you think I'm not doing that stuff? I'm like, I'm just in here to help you church plant. I'm moving at the speed of instruction on that stuff. Not my thing.
Oh, dude, it was awesome. And then I literally can just imagine how much he probably regretted messaging me, because let me put it like this. He leaves me one little message. Hey, like to get some advice. I responded with 9 full-length paragraphs later.
It's like when you go, so what do you think of like end times and stuff? And then the guy goes, I'm the great Cornholio, and Bible prophecy on you, and you're like, dude, shut up, Beavis. It's like he unloads like he's had a Crappuccino or something. I just had to talk about them. I had to.
A simple yes would have sufficed.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that was my big story. And
hey, real quick, for those of you that got my email, if you're not on my email sign-up list, I'm on PeytonJones.ninja. If you sign up there, not only do you get a free ebook, which, by the way, is a preview of my next book coming out, Ninja, but you also get emails that I send to you every week, and it is exclusive content. And this week I asked if people would I don't ask things. In fact, I think in the months that it's been up for probably about a year now, I think I've only asked like one thing. And that was last week. I just said, hey, if you're enjoying Reaching the Unreached, would you just tell people about it? So for all of those of you that have been posting quotes and pictures, and, I got little memes like Beavis, and as John MacArthur called him, his unmentionable friend. He's on there.
He did not.
He did. I heard him live. That's where I got it from. I have ever since then gotten more joy out of calling him Beavis and his unmentionable friend, because that's funnier to me.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah. So, but what's amazing to me is I've got all these memes, and it's funny because I don't make these memes. Everybody else makes the memes on the book. So when you see like someone this week, I'm trying to remember who it was. I believe it was the gentleman you were speaking of, which will remain nameless for the first time in this podcast since I've been talking. He did one on Gilligan's Island, so it's Gilligan and the Skipper. People keep sending these to me. I think because the church is zero and they know my sense of humor. So I'm posting these things and people are making new memes. So if you want to make a meme, over, till the end, let's have a meme competition. If you want to make a meme for Reaching the Unreached and post it, and tag me in it on Facebook or Twitter, at the end of the month, we will announce on the podcast who the winner is of the Reaching the Unreached meme competition.
Calm down, diddly 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 diddly. They did their best, shoddily iddly iddly diddly. Gotta be nice, hostility diddly biddly diddly. Ah, hell, diddly ding dong crap.
Unmentionable.
My favorite.
Unmentionable
That
friend.
one and the brother we're out there quote.
Ooh, yeah, I gotta remember where I stuck that one. I don't remember.
I need to send you all of those quotes all over again.
I got a whole bunch of them in here, and I honestly have no idea what these ones are. Like this is a classic one.
Recently, I stopped memorizing scripture and started memorizing passages of Church Zero. I read Peyton Jones more than I read Francis Chan.
I'm just throwing it out there.
Hey, now that one was just wrong. You went too far there, Mr. Dan Sams.
Apology accepted, Captain Nita.
So we should probably actually get into our topic because I got no more smack talk.
I was thinking that I could feel that. I could feel it in the force. I could just feel that that's where we were at, which is cool. So here's what I want to talk about. First off, let me kind of tell you guys that if you're not tracking with Exponential, Pete and I are going to be there this year. If you're planning on being at the Exponential Conference, we will be there. I
can't believe Pete and I are going to be there. Like,
not as a couple or anything. Is that what did I say?
Why am I like the fact that I am going to be there is hilarious to me. And then when you look at, well, it's a Q&A session. We'll let Pete sit on the stage for a Q&A. You know what's going to happen, right? There's going to be 5 people in the audience, and I'm going to be like, yeah, what he just said.
Yeah, but at the end, we're going to give them the Pete's going to do his magic. He's going to be like, hey, now let me talk to you about,
stuff.
What are you going to talk? Yeah,
stuff.
Yeah, stuff.
Important stuff.
Yeah, man. So,
did you get that out of your throat before you're going to carry on?
No, I did not.
Church Planner Magazine.
So here's the deal. Right now, Exponential, if you're not paying attention, they're releasing free content every week. Now, I have a love affair with John Wesley. It goes deeper than Pete and I's love affair. I just said that to make you uncomfortable. Did it work?
No, you can't make me uncomfortable.
It stopped working. It's kind of like there's like a tolerance that builds up around me after a time. At first, used to always poke the bear, and Pete's kind of, you don't like it when I say you're homophobic. You're not homophobic, like it's just towards me.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of people like to hear someone be like, "Hey, you don't like it when I call you homophobic." Yeah, that's a term of
so
endearment.
what I always say is, Pete, it's not, when I say that, it's not homosexuals. It's just men. Like, Pete just doesn't like men.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You don't hug me.
I don't like to be hugged by women either. It's people I don't like. Like, why is this so difficult for you to understand? Why are you trying to hug me so much that you think I'm the homophobic one?
So that was just an example of how I poked the bear and just make Pete uncomfortable. So it didn't work the first time. So I just
thought Smack Talk was over. It's not over at all.
Smack Talk is never over on this podcast. So back to John Wesley and me, which is the title of my next book. Oh, that's so funny. Sorry, you're not like I'm cracking myself up over here. Sorry. So John Wesley is, to me, my hero, and it's funny because I was at an event this week, and Alan Hirsch was just getting me all excited because he was talking about John Wesley, just dropping a couple things here and there. But I've been reading for a few years now. I kind of made it a pilgrimage, and I'm going to read a bunch of John Wesley books because a good friend of mine, I like to call him my corruptor. When I was a young, pasty white reform boy in Lloyd Jones's church, there was a guy there who became like a dad to me, and he was what you would call a lay preacher on what the Welsh call the connection, which is like saying a circuit. Because they still have what they would consider the circuits that were set up in Wales, but they call them the connection. So he would go around from chapel to chapel and he would preach. He was a lay preacher. He was a business owner. He wasn't he was like the Pete Mitchell of Wales, And so he would go around and he'd preach, and we get together and talk. And he was very disruptive. He would always kind of sow these seeds of, well, maybe you should. So a lot of my first century style thinking goes back to him. He would say, well, now let's look at the book of Acts. Let's talk about how they did it, because at that time I was imbibing everything I could from the Westminster Confession, from John Calvin, from all of this. And the more I did that, the more he would push back. He himself was reformed, but he would say, remember, reforming always means going back to the first century. And I'm not convinced that the Reformation got there. So he goes, so what I think you need to do is you need to keep reforming. And that just kind of stuck with me. So as I looked, at church history, I've always loved church history. It's something that Pete and I share, a love of church history. Pete, in fact, has been saying to me recently that he's just thinking guns are boring, and he wants to just devote himself to studying the Christian history of the world.
I've also given up Audible for paperback.
Yes, and the thicker the better, Pete says. But here's the reality, is that Pete Mitchell – no, I'm teasing. So actually, so John Wesley was the guy who was the closest thing to the Apostle Paul that we have. And so as we look at him, what I want to talk about today is how he planted churches. And there's a free ebook that you can get right now. It's by Winfield Bevins. I will interview him on hardcore church planting. He is the dean of church planting over at Asbury University. And it's called Marks of a Movement. It's a free ebook. Like I said, you can go to exponential.com. Check it out. What the church today can learn from the Wesleyan revival. So I'm adding this to my research pile for my next book, because the next book is about kind of like, doing what Paul did. And John Wesley was the guy who came the closest. And what makes him really interesting is he was able to do this in another time, because you always hear people argue, well, that was the first century and the world was a lot different. And what Wesley did that was unique was he never left the Anglican Church. He didn't start a denomination. He inadvertently did. But until his dying day, he said, I will not start another denomination. He was an Anglican minister. He told guys, you need to be an Anglican if you're going to do these certain things. But he was very much into lay preaching. He looked at the scripture and said, I believe ordination should come through the Anglican Church, but I also believe that there's this mobile ministry that we see in the New Testament that all of you can do. And that was the genius of it. A lot of it was just people that didn't have to go to seminary. It was a very empowering movement, and they spread rapidly. So like my buddy, he would be the equivalent of like a modern day circuit rider, so to speak. The difference is he didn't do open air preaching, and a lot of the stuff that the Methodists did isn't done. So what Wesley got to do, because he wasn't starting a denomination, was he got to establish certain practices that didn't involve starting a church. What he inadvertently did was kind of start a network, which is what Paul did. If you look at the Apostle Paul, Paul starts off and he has a network starting in Antioch, going across the Mediterranean. And then when he gets there, so it's kind of like the Mediterranean network. But then when he goes past the Taurus mountain range, he has the Galatian network. So he has an Asia Minor network and he has a Galatian church planting network. Then he plants a bunch of churches in Macedonia. Now he has the Macedonian network. We see the churches like Ephesus and the ones planted. That becomes a local network. Rome becomes its own network. So now we're seeing 4 or 5 networks. So this will kind of all come about in the next book, but I'm giving you a little sneak peek here. But local networks were a thing. And so what John Wesley did is he started off in Bristol and he started preaching there. And then he went over to London and he had been in America. He wasn't very well received in America. So he did do a ton of stuff there. But Whitefield was kind of like the golden boy over there. And they didn't really like Wesley in Wales either. Wesley was very disliked in a lot of places. But in England, he was bigger than a lot of the other guys in the Methodist movement. So Whitefield kind of was really popular in Wales, which is why Lloyd Jones's church was, believe it or not, the denomination was called the Welsh Calvinistic Methodists. And people always say, wow, there's an oxymoron, Calvinistic Methodists. But that's because Whitefield had started his circuit over there. And that, again, was called the Connection. And there were different local networks called connections. But what's more important about that is that when John Wesley went and started these networks, he would appoint somebody so he would go into an area. This is kind of his methodology. He would go in there and he was apostolic, so hugely apostolic, mobile. Moved around like Paul. He would go somewhere, he would preach the gospel. He wasn't planting a church, but he would preach the gospel. He would basically say, a lot of you think you're Christians, you're not. And one of the hallmarks and distinctives of Wesley's preaching, you can go back and see the different messages if you've ever studied the gospel, how, like we always think the gospel today, because in the American context, it's, believe in Jesus, he'll come into your heart, He'll forgive you of all your sins, and you'll go to heaven. That's the gospel we preach. And raise your hand, if you want a piece of that. And that's a very American product. I hate to say it that way, but that's an Americanization of the gospel. I'm not saying it's not the gospel. I'm saying it's our flavor of it. Well, when Mark Driscoll came on the scene, he started saying, was that?
Sorry, that was a cough.
Right. Okay. Because that actually was just legit. It sounded like I said Mark Driscoll, and it wasn't that. No. It actually was a legitimate cough.
It was a cough.
Just had to. I heard it how the listener might hear it, so I had to say that. But here's the deal. When Driscoll came on the scene, he was saying, "Hey, look, there's the gospel of, Jesus will redeem you. There's the gospel of Jesus will forgive you." And he kind of pointed out we have a forgiveness-based gospel. And then he said, there's also the gospel of Jesus will empower you. Like he will give you victory over it. There's all these different things that you can preach that are part of the centrality of the gospel message. Obviously, you're preaching the death and resurrection of Christ, but the way, the application that you give it can change. You just can't strip the heart and the core out of it. So what Whitefield did is Whitefield came on, and if you study Whitefield, the gospel he preached was the new birth. His message of conversion was almost exclusively be born again. And so people who had never really heard that preached in a gospel message, I mean, that's weird to think that, because to an American, that's it. You must be born again. That's like the Americanization. But Whitefield, that's what they were. They were known as conversionists. That was the start of the evangelical movement, that it was a conversion experience that became the hallmark. Now, where that has maybe, and I'll get into this, where this has basically made it hard for us, is we do not disciple non-believers. Matt Fretwell, director of New Breed, did his doctoral dissertation on New Breed church planting, and his whole thing was the way that New Breed disciples unbelievers into believers. And of course, Pete's been at Refuge Long Beach, and he would know that was a big part of what I would do when I drive down to Long Beach. I didn't just drive there for night meetings that Christians came to. I met with people that came to the church on Sunday. I mean, if you guys aren't meeting with and discipling the non-believers that come through your door, or people that you make, good luck with church planting, because all you're doing on Sunday is running a show and expecting people to come up and for all the magic to happen then. So what Wesley did is he would disciple. We'll get into this, where he would disciple unbelievers. That's a system he set up. But his message of the gospel was not sin and judgment. Wesley's message of the gospel was leading a new life, and a gospel of empowerment, a gospel of loving God with all your heart, mind, and soul, that God would give you a new heart. And this is why he got, it's one of the reasons, but it's one of the hallmarks of when people said he preached sinless perfectionism. And over the years, it seemed like he kind of went back and forth. Sometimes he'd say, no, I didn't. And other times he'd say, well, look, read Romans 6 or read this. There is power in the Holy Spirit for you to overcome sin. And so, but what his central gospel message was not just justification alone. It was also, well, once you're justified by faith through grace, you have this empowerment to live a new life. There's this new life you can live that you couldn't live before. And that was a hallmark. It wasn't just sin. What theologians would come to say about Wesley is that he preached a gospel of righteousness, right? Rather than a gospel of forgiveness of sin. He did preach forgiveness of sin. I mean, he was straight spot on the death and resurrection of Jesus. He preached the true gospel, but the emphasis was on this newness of life, the empowering of the Holy Spirit. He, of course, had years of trying to please God, then found he couldn't do it, then had the Spirit rush into his life. Everything changed. And so for him, this was a very powerful experience. It was part of his own testimony. And so what he would do is he would go around preaching that. Now, as he did, he kind of learned to do what Paul did. And Pete, I should pause for a second. Do you want to talk? Do you want to talk?
No.
Okay. All right. I'm sorry, brother. I'm just going off.
I have a way to turn you off.
I know. It's taking over me like the...
I was actually just waiting for you to get interesting. You hadn't reached that point yet, so I figured it was too early to cut you off.
I'm looking at you while I'm talking, and I'm like, I must be boring Pete to tears here.
I feel like I'm reading a history book right now.
I know, but this has application to us today.
I'm waiting for that.
It's coming. Here it comes. You ready?
Yeah.
So what he did was he went around preaching. And think of it in terms of your guys' outreach. You know, when you're sharing the gospel, obviously John Wesley did open air. You're not going to do that, right? Like, you're not going to go into a town, stand in the square and preach in the open air. I've done it. I've done it for quite a long time. I did it weekly for about a year with a brother who is super gifted at it. But it's just not going to be the thing unless you want to be seen as a crazy person. It's probably not going to be the thing that you do. But the point is your outreach. What Wesley did is when he traveled to a town, he would preach the gospel. And it wasn't the preaching of the gospel that was the secret sauce. It was what he did afterwards. He had a system of discipleship. And what he would do is when he left, he would take people and he would teach them how to have what was called a band. And a band was like a small group. I can't remember how big it was. It was something like, 10 to 15 people, something dumb like that. And I'm not saying it's dumb. I'm just saying, I can't remember the number, but it was small. And they would meet in a house and they would disciple one another. And they would have a set of questions that they would have to go through. And those questions would be about their experience with God. It was very personal. It depended upon people sharing their testimony, which, if you remember, testimonies in the Bible are huge. In the book of Acts, Paul gives us testimony 3 times. I bring this up in Church Zero, cha-ching, because I say, look, everybody has one. Everybody has a testimony. And I can't use that phrase, everybody has, because some people don't. Like, there's no body part I can point to and say that everyone has one. Because some people don't have a nose. Some people don't have an ear.
That was for your own benefit on that one.
Yeah. But everybody has a testimony. So the reality is that you're
thought you were going to say something else. I heard test, and I was like, where is this going?
But everybody has a testimony. I'm just keeping you on your toes to make sure that you're paying attention. And
Church Planter Magazine.
So what would happen is everybody shared their testimony. And if you've ever been in a church where they share testimonies, it's just kind of like a stimulus for conversion, right? People begin to see how God deals with a soul. And so people would come into these, and people would basically be discipled through these groups into believers. And of course, the recent church planting talk has been that, hey, we were called to make disciples, not converts. When you make converts, you end up making consumer Christians. When you make disciples, you end up basically producing people that make disciples, right? Disciples make disciples. So you end up getting people on mission. They're these people in these groups. Imagine you're beginning to understand how God works with the soul. You learn inadvertently how to deal with people and talk to people about the use of their soul. So within, a few decades of Wesley doing this, the numbers are staggering. 30% of the population consider themselves Methodists. I mean, it was just the most explosive growth movement we'd ever seen in the West. And so when people look at China and they go, well, the the cultural systems that we have in parts of China, and this, it's not like that in America. It's not like that in America. But we've seen a movement like this happen in the West. And surprise, surprise, John Wesley was using first century principles, because that's the same thing Paul would do. Paul would literally leave elders or people like Timothy or others in the town that once people were getting saved, they would literally continue the gospel work. And that's what Paul needed to happen. So the question that I want to ask today is, have you given thought to what you do with non-believers who come through your door? People that hear the gospel, do you just expect them to come back the next week? Do you expect them just to come through? Do you have small groups where people have their souls dealt with, where people can talk and ask questions? That was kind of our structure. You know, we had a series of groups that went on, and those would incubate as core teams, which also became kind of what Wesley got a lot of heat for. Was the Anglicans got mad that he had all these little small groups in every city in England that he ever gone to, because what they said was, you're actually creating churches within churches. And Wesley's retort to that was, no, I'm actually creating Christians out of your non-Christian churches. He didn't pull any punches. He's like, hey, most of your ministers in the Anglican church aren't saved anyways. I ain't leaving the Anglican church. I'm reforming it. And that's what he saw himself doing. Pretty cool. He was kind of a hard character.
I guess so.
Yeah.
I guess so.
So what are your thoughts on that, Pete Mitchell?
I just want to know, when did the World of Warcraft take over in his life? Because I understand that was a big motivating factor for him.
Did you?
I did.
So, funny story about that is one of the major dudes in World of Warcraft, dude I respect the heck out of. And I know his pastor. And so I gave him a copy of Reaching the Unreached, and I highlighted. That was page 130. I highlighted that page that when I planted my first church, I got so addicted to World of Warcraft that my wife was going, hey, that's enough. And I confess it in there, because I had a wrestling match with God, shall we say. And God was like, you got to surrender this. If you want me to work in your life, you got to surrender that.
Yeah, he hasn't said that to me about guns. That's all I'm saying.
You know what's funny though, Pete, is I'm a big fan that recreation is healthy for a minister. I think, whatever it is that you like to do, if it's like shooting off guns, if it's, fishing, whatever it is that you relax, doing, I think it's video. I'll tell people video games were like the secret to me staying in ministry. I know that sounds weird, but I need a place where I can go. Because guys, if you're in ministry, you're morbid all the time. Now, here I am talking about Wesley. Wesley got up at 4 every morning, right? He rode hundreds of miles. The one guy said by the time his detractors were out of bed, Wesley had already ridden 100 miles on horseback, preached twice, on and on and on. Like it's crazy what this guy produced. He wrote an entire school curriculum. He wrote a physician's almanac. He wrote, it was called Primitive Medicine. He wrote the amount of works that John Wesley wrote. And a lot of times he was writing on the back of horses. He had a mobile library, so he'd just devour books. Wesley was an uncanny human being. He was almost superhuman. I think he was part Nephilim. There you go. I'm going to put that in my book.
Oh,
Wesley was
my
Nephilim.
gosh. You just said John Wesley was part Nephilim.
Yeah. Hey, I mentioned Blizzard, so it's like Diablo. There's
I think
Nephilim
you
in it.
need to back that one up.
Yeah, baby. So, and I'm only teasing. I say inappropriate things. So,
When I get nervous, I just say things. Whatever comes out, it just happens.
The fool speaks all that's in his heart. That is, for obvious reasons, one of my favorite proverbs. But but to be honest, like I do, before I get ready to church plant, I'll feel God saying, hey, we got to talk about a couple things. And there's always like a little struggle. So like right now, I'm starting to feel like I'm getting ready to plant again. My house is getting worked on. We'll start opening our house up probably in the summer. And that was our plan last year, was to start opening the house up for outreach. We're going to do a reading group around the fire pit and with my neighbors. And this year we'll start something. We don't know what it's going to look like, but we will start doing ministry in our home again. Once it gets put back together, it's like a Lego that's been taken apart right now. I have a see-through house.
It's do?
I've seen it's literally a see-through house right now. You can see through in one side of my house.
Don't you wish that you would have built two houses? Because you've got a double lot.
Well, it's funny because I do have a double lot, and we could easily like sell off, like make an instant mill.
Yeah.
Just be like, boom, you know.
You could have no mortgage.
But I have a double plot by the beach, so it's like, yeah, no, I have a double plot by the beach. I want a triple plot now. No, I'm teasing, but you know, it literally, like, we're just making a house. I'm getting a rad office. It's going to have a fireplace in it.
You are not.
I have to church plant, because otherwise I'll become what I'm not supposed to be in Reaching the Unreached, ching, where I talk about, you know, the dude who wants to stay in his office. I'm going to have a secret door in it. I really am. It's going to be a bookcase that opens up. Shh.
Are you serious?
I'm dead serious.
I'm having that same thing put in my office.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Dude, I told you we're twinsies.
But you know what's on the other side of mine?
Yes, I do. You know what's going to be on the other side of mine?
Batman?
Film Studio. Jonesy's getting back into YouTube. If you guys have not checked out my YouTube, man, this is like Ad Central today. If you haven't checked out my YouTube channel, it's
if you haven't checked out my YouTube channel, it's probably good that you haven't. But
yeah,
soon.
I have 145 subscribers. You want to subscribe? Check it out. Anyways, it's Church Planning Ninja is the name of my. It's Ninja Church Planner. I should get that right.
I'm offended by that term, by the way.
Oh, don't sign up for Church Planning Ninjas. YouTube, sign up for Ninja Church Planners. Whew, that was a near miss.
It's someone else.
This is why this works, Pete, because we really don't take ourselves that serious, do we?
I don't know, man. This to me, you haven't gotten into the meat and potatoes. You've been doing so much history. You had to have recently read a book or something.
I did, and I'm geeking out. The reality is, I've got to research. You know my research.
Okay,
right?
I need to share this with everyone. I call you earlier in the week, and I inform you, okay, we've got 3 magazines, Church Planner Magazine and a couple other 2, that I'm about ready to put a bullet to and kill. Like, literally, just like wipe them out, start all over. And so I call Peyton, and I go, Peyton, you know, we can actually start another magazine. It's not going to cost us anything because I can kill off this other one. And what does Peyton say to me? Oh, we can do that books and culture one that died. Because that's what we want to do. Focus on something that couldn't make it and do it all over again.
Wouldn't that be rad, though?
No, actually.
No, it wouldn't. And I knew that when I said it, but I had to say it or I would regret not saying it. Should we do a World of Warcraft magazine?
No, you brought that one up to me like 6 months ago. And I was like,
more than that. It was like 2 years ago.
I was just like, look, I think you can do that, but I have zero interest in World of Warcraft.
And Pete once worked at a video, like, that makes you my coolest friend. You worked at a video game. You guys don't understand. I read a lot of books, but I read books about video game companies and the history of them. I read 3 of them. I read 2 of those in the last year, and I read the history of Dungeons and the guy who started Dungeons and Dragons.
I don't even know what to say to that. I just started Armada by Ernest Cline, same guy who did Ready Player One.
Was it good?
I just started it, and I'm only 10 minutes in.
Nice.
10
it's
minutes.
Not going to be Ready Player One. That's the problem when you write a book like that. But hey, this is not Smack Talk. This is actually the end of the podcast. So apparently, I didn't get into the meat and potatoes. But I hope just
can we make it a series?
But, you know, just real quick to sum up in like 60 seconds, this is kind of the idea that I think works today that we did it in Refuge Long Beach, where we had a series of small groups. We called them COGs, or missional communities, communities of grace. People use different names. Micro churches is another name that's kind of getting big right now. And basically all it was an incubator for a core team. and an incubator for a church planter. We were discipling church planters as if they're leading many congregations and telling them at a certain point, hey, by the way, that's your core team. Go to San Pedro now. Hey, go to Whittier now. Go to Seal Beach now. Go to that was our goal, was to have each one become its own church plant. And that's kind of like this series of bands, these little communities that Wesley set up. And then the circuit happens when the apostle, it would be like a guy like me, I was ministering to all of those. I started all of them, but every once in a while I'd go and visit them. And I'd, of course, send my prophetic guy around to all of them to help stimulate and stir up the gifts. And that's, to me, that's just a model that is so stinking powerful. And when we saw ourselves getting together on Sundays, it was for outreach. And I tell people the real church is in, we're a back to front church. The real church is happening in homes. And I think people hear that, but they don't really understand what I'm saying when I say that. I don't think they really understand the model. And so it's a pretty cool deal, man. And that's all I have to say about that.
And I appreciate that that's all you have to say about that.
So, Pete, obviously, that setting up those type of apostolic networks, local networks, is a busy job. Obviously, a guy can't do that and run all the finances in this church, can he now?
Yeah, but you know what's even more important than running the finances in his church? Where does his church meet?
Oh, well, I'm glad you asked that. That was a segue handoff. Well, Pete.
That was a segue reversal.
There are more places that a church planter can meet in than in a community center or a school or even a park in the open air. Did you know, Pete, that people could actually meet in a movie theater?
What?
Yes. As a matter of fact, it's the thing now.
Mamma mia, that's a spicy meatball.
Oh, it's so bad. Yes, Pete. As a matter of fact, people are meeting in movie theaters. I don't know why I can't say meeting. People are meeting in movie theaters every Sunday. They are renting movie theater space to have their church in, Pete. And you know where you find out about that? Regal Cinemas has a website called corporateboxoffice.com/theater church. Don't just go type in theater church in there. You have to put THEATRE-church. That's corporateboxoffice.com/theater. Remember, that's THEATRE-church.
I'm not only the heckler president, I'm also a client.
Well, hey, this has been Pete and Peyton Jones, not Pete Jones, Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones, reminding you that if you want to reach the ones nobody's reaching, you need to go where nobody's going and do what nobody's doing.
Thanks for joining us for another weekly episode of the Church Planter Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Peyton Jones. We'd love to hear your comments on this episode of the Church Planter Podcast. Visit us online and let us know what you thought at churchplanterpodcast.com. If you subscribe to us via iTunes and have enjoyed the podcast, leave us a positive review. The more positive reviews we receive in iTunes, the more iTunes will promote us to other church planners who would benefit from this show. This podcast is brought to you by the Church Planter Magazine, which is available in the iTunes newsstand or online via churchplantermagazine.com.